Bill Shorten, welcome.
Great.
You haven't done much media, hardly anything, in fact, since the May 18 election, so thank you for joining us today. The coalition thought you would win on May 18. What sort of grieving process do you go through when you experience something so deeply personal like that?
Well, it was very disappointing. Very, very disappointing.
It was more than that, wasn't it?
Well, very disappointing for the nation, for the people who voted for Labor and people who needed a Labor government. Very disappointing personally. But I've had some time off with the family. And, of course, I'm still in Parliament and I have the opportunity to work as part of the Labor opposition to hold the government to account. So, you've got to move on. The party's going to have a review and, we'll see what comes out of that. But in the meantime, I'm very grateful to the United team who supported me for those 6 years and very grateful to the millions of people who voted for Labor. We'll learn the lessons and we'll be a very diligent and united opposition.
On the personal shock, though, what sort of grief process do you go through when there is such a grand expectation that you are going to be the next Prime Minister?
Oh, listen, it's happened. What I have been able to do is reconnect with my family, and that is a silver lining. And to the millions of Australians who voted Labor, Labor will still be a very determined opposition, and we'll still keep advocating our values that plenty of people wanted to vote for us, but we'll have to learn our lessons. That's why the party's engaging in a very extensive review.
Did you find any comfort in the fact that the election was relatively close?
Oh, listen, it was very disappointing. You can't gild that, Lily. Just plainly very disappointing. And disappointing for me, and I think disappointing for a lot of people. But nonetheless, it's happened. It's the democracy. As I said on the night, the people have expressed their view. So we've got to move on and be the best possible opposition. It's a privilege to serve in Parliament, I understand that. And I've still got the fire for politics and committed to making sure that I work as part of a united team.
What did Chloe say?
Oh, listen, she can speak for herself. As people know, she's a very capable lady.
Well, she's not here. What sort of counsel did she offer?
Well, first of all, I'm going to let her speak for herself. She put up with 6 years as being with me as opposition leader. I think she's got the right to speak for herself.
Do you take personal responsibility for the loss?
That's why I stood down. Absolutely. You've got to take some responsibility. But as I said, I came here to talk about robo-debt. We've got a review. I appreciate the several questions.
Okay. You're calling for the government to scrap the robo-debt system. Why?
The robo-debt system is causing untold hardship. It's seriously malfunctioning. Did you know that over 100,000 of our fellow Australians have received incorrect demands to pay debts to government that they didn't owe? It's causing unnecessary distress, and I think the government needs to go back to the drawing board. It's not that people shouldn't pay money they owe the government, they should, but just relying on algorithms and automated systems taking out the human factor, just giving people a number without explaining how it's been arrived at, reversing the onus, asking people to go back and find financial records 20 years ago, it's causing too much hardship and unfairness.
So you acknowledge that the government's obliged to recoup money that's overpaid. How would you design this new system?
Well, we'll talk to the experts, but first of all, we know the current one is not working. If you make 100,000 mistakes, I think time's up, isn't it? You've got to go back to the drawing board. The Australian, one of the social institutes who researches these matters has an alarming statistic that 429 people under the age of 35 after getting robo-debts have died. This is a problem. And it is not the job of government to intimidate and harass its own citizens, especially when they won't even explain, when people get this letter of demand from the government, how the number has been arrived at.
7:30 program last night revealed that compliance teams were pushing for daily targets.
Yeah.
Is this the wrong incentive when you are involving people and targeting people who are potentially very vulnerable?
Government should work for the people. And the idea that there's a bounty or a robotic system or a pressure on contractors and Centrelink officers to have to get a body count of money back, to me, isn't the function of government. Now, if people owe the government money, that's important, no question. But let's do a much more humane system. There's been 100,000 mistakes. People receive debts in the mail, a demand letter from the government. That's very stressful. But they don't even have it explained to them where this number's been arrived at. And there's been so many mistakes made. Time's up for this system. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's not treat people who receive payments as potential de facto criminals. Let's just treat them as citizens.
It's not so much debt with some people, it's the fact they don't really realise how the debt has been accrued, whether it's underreporting of income or overpayment. That's critical, surely?
Well, I think that if you're going to issue a demand for someone to pay the government money or repay the money, you should explain why you think that person owes the government money. Just sending an automated letter and saying you are X thousand dollars and no more detail than that, I think that is horrendously unfair. It's reversing the onus. So imagine you get a letter in the mail, all of a sudden you find out you owe the government money, and as we've been proven, many of these letters of demand are wrong, and you don't have it explained to you why you owe the government money. That's a lot of pressure, and a lot of people don't have thousands and thousands of dollars simply to humour the government with.
Townsville Mayor Jenny Hill has been saying that flood victims have been re-traumatised through some of Centrelink's robo-debt tactics. What are you calling for when it comes to those people?
Let's put the humans back in control of the system. Whistling up an algorithm, crunching numbers and taking out the human oversight to make sure that the system is fair, well, that's what we need to do, put people back into the system. If you keep cutting...
Do you want an amnesty, though, for the Townsville flood victims?
Well, I went up there and visited during and after the floods. It was devastating. I don't believe the amounts of money will be very great. I certainly think they should put the whole scheme on hold. Let's just get the information right before you start accusing people of owing the government money.
Putting people back into the system, though, is going to cost a hell of a lot of money. Where would you find it? Well,
first of all, this system's causing a hell of a lot of problems. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a compliance program. If you owe the government money, you should pay them. But there's got to be a better way. This is just, set and forget. This is the algorithms and the robo-debt taking over, insufficient checking. And as we've seen, this is not a system with a 97 or 98% success rate. 100,000 mistakes.
On the Disability Royal Commission, you've called for 2 commissioners to stand down or to be stood down. John Ryan, he's got experience in the area, and Barbara Bennett, former Deputy Secretary of the Families and Communities Department. Doesn't their experience commend their involvement rather than condemn it?
I'm not making any comments about 2 of the 6 commissioners and their personal intentions. I'm sure they're well intentioned. But 59 disability groups have said that these 2 Royal Commissioners have at different times oversighted the system that they're now, or parts of the system they're now being asked to investigate.
But doesn't that give them expertise?
Well, would you have asked, when you're having a Royal Commission, you don't necessarily ask the people that, or the departments you're investigating to investigate themselves. I'd have thought in a country of 25 million people, we could find 6 experts who are independent.
So is this conflict of interest, or are you suggesting they might be responsible?
It's a conflict of interest. I'm not making any point beyond that. But this Royal Commission, Labor called for it, the government agreed to do it. The treatment of people with disabilities has been poor, and time again we've heard stories. So I think this Royal Commission will help us yet again get to the bottom of what's going on. I just think that if you're going to have a Royal Commission, surely in a country as big as Australia with as many people as we have and experts, we could find 6 commissioners who don't have an immediate relationship to potentially departments or decisions which are being investigated.
Yeah, I know that you've referenced the fact that Labor is going through a review. Do you acknowledge, though, that there's a difference between the merit of policies that you took to the election and perhaps the mistakes made in the messaging?
Oh, listen, I think you're a formidable interviewer, but what I'm not going to do is preempt the review.
Are you in politics for the long haul?
I love being in politics. It's the chance to make a difference, part of a united team, and I'm very grateful to the voters in my electorate for giving me another term.
Is it really credible for the Labor Party to ditch policies that you held for so long?
First of all, the party is reviewing the whole election, and what I'm going to do is give time for that process to happen. And whilst I'm a very staunch defender of the ABC, and I'm very alarmed at the cuts that have happened to the ABC, I won't necessarily preempt the review on ABC.
Do you have any resentments, finally?
No, I'm very privileged, very fortunate.
Bill Shorten, thanks for your time.
Thank you.